everyone, welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sesotris, and this week I wanted to talk about book reviewing rather than books themselves. I know online spaces like BookTok and BookTube and all that. There's so many reviews, but it's kind of difficult sometimes to write a review that actually captures your audience. Part of that is just because we all have short attention spans because of the fast-paced kind of world, and to be honest, that's a little consumerist, and that's not a great thing. So we do need to find a way to like chill out a little bit and like let things be instead of like having to race through things. But with that said, writing a book review or like delivering a book review on video can be kind of tricky sometimes. And so there's a few things that I wanted to just sort of mention just as like a general tip. Now, it's not to say, oh, there's a cat here. That's not to say that this is going to work for everyone, but just some things to be on the lookout for. So the first point I wanted to make is focus on like the idea of the book instead of the plot. There's some reviews where I see where they just sort of just tell a plot summary. And you know how like movie trailers nowadays basically like give away the whole plot of the whole story and that's it. Sorry, I have to hold it because the cat's decided she wants to start heaving herself against the tripod. Can you stop that, please? And so anyways, you want to avoid giving away too much of the plot. Not just because of spoilers, but just if you talk about the plot too much, it can make it feel a little dry. I don't know what it is, but like it kind of removes some of the mystery of like what the plot is. Some of the best reading experiences I've ever had was when I just went into a book completely blind. I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know what to expect. I had no preconceived notions of what the book was. And the reading experience was just delightful in itself. And so when you're giving a review or whatever, keep like a really short plot summary, but make it more like this is the premise of the book rather than this is the plot. So you don't want to give them a play-by-play of the plot. Use like words to describe like the feel of the book. Like you can use comp titles. That's a really common thing you do. And I know some people say that that's kind of cheap, but it's a good way to be like, if you like this book, you'll probably like this book kind of thing. So I would say go for that. Talk about the vibes, the feel of it, because this is very much a, what experience did you have while you were reading the book? I know a lot of times we can get really caught up on like, this is a good book and you need to read it, but like a lot of people are mood readers. And so you don't want it to be like, this is a good book and you should read it. And then like you read it and you're just not in the mood for that kind of book at that time. So it's much more helpful to be like, this is the kind of book if you want this sort of reading experience. That way someone's like, ooh, okay, so if they're in the mood for something like that, then they know what book to go for. The next tip is don't get too caught up on like objective praise. There is this kind of feeling that like you want your book review to be as objective and rational as possible, because there's this idea that like books are like, just good in a very general sense, and if it's well done, then it's something that you need to do. And so like don't get too caught up on like objective praise. Talk about the subjective stuff, because that's what's really going to grab people. They want to know what you loved about the book. They want to know what your emotions were when you were reading it. They want to know how you responded to the book. And that's a lot more helpful. If you're writing like a literary analysis, then sure, you're going to be a little bit more objective. But even then, as someone who has written and read many literary analyses and like scholarly works, these people are subjectively in love with these books as well. You can write a really stirring analysis of like the psychological mythology and symbolism in Moby Dick, but like the person wrote it because they really love the book. And so it's really kind of hard to distance yourself from that. So there's no such thing as like a purely scientific, rational school of literary analysis or reviewing or anything like that. So just embrace that it's going to be subjective and go for that. Finally, this is kind of connected to the other two, but don't be afraid to embrace your inner reader. So a good book isn't like some kind of glowing orb that kind of gives off rays of like excellence. And everyone who kind of interacts with that glowing orb of a book is going to kind of equally, I'll say, yes, this is a good book, this is a classic. If you pick up, something like Pride and Prejudice, a lot of people do love it, but it's not like everyone's experience reading it is exactly the same. Some people get different things out of it. And so, like, lean into that sort of reader response side of things. Embrace kind of what spoke to you specifically as a person, rather than like just talking about how it's so well crafted, it's so good, it's so excellent, and everyone should read it. If you say like everyone needs to read this, that's one of those things that it isn't really that compelling. I mean, well, what you mean is you really, really enjoyed it. You had a great experience reading the book, and you want as many other people to experience that moment of joy reading it as they can. But this idea of like just kind of staying away from the book and just being like, this is good, it's excellent, it's well done, everyone should read it, it should be required reading in schools, that doesn't tell me a lot about what you found really engaging in the book. So like, don't be afraid to just be like, I loved this book because of this, or this, there's a character in it that I really resonated with, or there's a plot twist that caught me off guard and left me like screaming in like a coffee shop somewhere. So like, talk about your reaction to the book, because it's going to be subjective, and that's fine. The reader response stuff is what makes reviews so much fun. So many conflicts in the book community kind of come from like folks who have made up their mind as to what is like objectively good and objectively bad. And if you don't agree with their categorization of things, then you're like a bad reader, or you're a poor judge of goodness in terms of books and that kind of thing. And that just, it doesn't help anybody. This, like, I think we're past postmodernism, but I really like kind of the postmodern school of thought where it's like, there is no one good ideal book that all books should kind of aspire to be like. There's no one correct way to interact with a book. A lot of like the fancy book reviews and like New York Times and stuff seem to be like this. It's kind of like they're going for this concept of like, this book is objectively good, or this book is like objectively bad, because they want to be seen as like the expert on the subject. And it doesn't really help anyone when you kind of see things like that. It's very rigid, it's very limiting, because you can read an incredible book at the wrong time and just have it not grab you. And unless you go back to it later and give it a second chance, you might even never get to experience the book in the way that kind of works best for you personally. So, that's, just be aware of that. Now, there are objective things that you can criticize about a book. I'm not saying that like you can't do that, but just be aware of what counts as objective criticism and what isn't. For example, if you read a book and you just say, oh, I just hated this, I thought it was boring, it didn't grab me, so it must be just a poorly constructed book. That's not very objective. It's probably just you weren't in the mood for it. It's not a genre that you particularly like, something like that. You can move on. But if it's something like, let's say there's a character turn that happens in a book that like comes out of nowhere, it's not foreshadowed, it doesn't make sense for the plot, it just feels like the author was just like, and suddenly they're a bad guy, click. That can be annoying. If there's like phrases that are repeated too often that don't serve a narrative purpose, there's that. You can get into more serious stuff like misrepresenting groups of people, prejudice and biases and stuff like that obviously they didn't have like a sensitivity reader, or the you know, the author just wanted to keep the stuff in, but it doesn't serve a narrative purpose. You know, like you could have like a hateful character, but it gets to a point where it doesn't feel like it's just this character's hateful. It feels like the author's pushing a hateful agenda through the book. So you can call that kind of stuff out, and that's important. But, you know, if your reasoning that you didn't like something is that like, oh, I found it boring, or I just didn't really get it, try rephrasing that as like, I didn't personally enjoy this book because it just didn't speak to me, or it just didn't seem like my kind of book. Something like that. If you accept the fact that we are subjective people and it's okay if you don't like it, other people may still like it. So, you know, that whole just, this is my opinion kind of thing is important, because you don't want to force people into thinking that if they didn't like this book but you did like it, then there's like something wrong with them, or they're just not smart enough to get it or something, because that's just elitist and silly and dumb. So I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. This is sort of a shorter video, but just enjoy reading. And when you're writing a review, write about what it did to you personally. What did it like cause you to react? Or how did it cause you to react? What did you personally love about it? What did you personally hate about it? I don't believe in like avoiding negative reviews or something like that, but just make sure that you're acknowledging the fact that like art is subjective and books are art, and it's okay if something didn't grab you, and you just kind of move on. You're like, this wasn't for me, I didn't personally like X, Y, Z, and move on with that. And that's kind of it. So with that said, I'll let you go. I will see you next week. In the meantime, happy reading and happy reviewing. Bye.